The quiet space around the Rexion conflict zone almost felt peaceful from a distance. But inside that region, nothing was peaceful. For years, alien factions had been fighting there, destroying ships, planets, stations, anything that came in their way. It was a place most travelers avoided, because entering that zone was like stepping into the center of a storm with no guarantee of survival. But on this day, something unusual happened. A small signal appeared on the scanners of the Xyler Dominion outpost. At first, the signal looked weak, almost like a small broken satellite drifting through the dark. No shape, no threat, no speed that suggested danger. The watch officer on duty barely paid attention. In a war zone filled with giant warships, laser storms, and dangerous traps, a tiny drifting object was nothing. He assumed it was a damaged drone or lost cargo that had wandered too close. He even thought about ignoring it, but protocol forced him to zoom in and check the source. The moment he did, his expression changed. The object was not a drone, not a satellite, not a piece of floating debris. It was a ship, a very small one, but still a fully built craft. Its hull was burned in several places, like it had survived a meteor shower or an attack. Its engines flickered weakly, as if they were close to giving up. No one expected a ship this small to enter a live battle zone. It seemed like a mistake, maybe a malfunction that pushed it into the wrong area. He zoomed in further and checked. The signature code coming from the vessel. The display froze for a second. Before decoding the message dot, it was human. The officer blinked twice, unsure if he was reading the truth. Humans were rare in this part of space. They stayed close to their own territories, far from alien wars. They were known as tough survivors, but they rarely interfered with alien conflicts unless they had no other choice. The officer quickly reported the finding to the command room. Within minutes, senior Dominion commanders gathered to review the signal. What is a human ship doing here? One of them asked. Maybe lost, another replied. Maybe spying, another suggested. Nobody had an answer. They watched the tiny vessel drift, engines struggling to function. It looked empty, abandoned even. But then something unexpected happened. The ship, weak and damaged, suddenly changed direction sharply. Its engines brightened for a moment, almost as if someone inside had forced them to work harder. More warnings flashed across the Dominion screens. The ship's distress beacon turned on. A coded human emergency signal echoed across the zone. This changed everything. A civilian signal could not be ignored. But humans rarely sent distress calls unless the situation was truly critical. Something was not right. The Dominion thought the small craft might be carrying refugees or survivors running from some disaster. But no matter the reason, one thing was clear. The ship had just crossed into the most dangerous region of the entire conflict dot at the same time. On the Karo's swarm side of the battlefield. Their scanners also picked up the human craft. The Karos did not care who entered the war zone. To them, anything that was not one of their own was automatically an enemy. They didn't care about distress signals. They didn't care about small ships or innocent travelers. They cared only about dominance, reports, spread across their fleet like wildfire. Unknown ship, detected, human origin, entering. The battle zone. The swarm commanders immediately ordered fighters to intercept. They didn't plan to talk. They didn't plan to warn. They planned to destroy. Back on the human ship, the crew was struggling. The vessel was called the Resolute, designed for long-distance travel and quick defense, not for heavy war. The people inside were shaken after escaping a ruined colony. Their route had been completely altered by something they couldn't understand. A sudden pull, like a gravitational trap, that dragged them into this deadly zone. Nobody knew what caused it. Maybe a weapon test. Maybe an enemy trick. Maybe a freak accident in space. But the result was the same. They were stuck in the middle of two alien armies with no clear way out. Inside the Resolute, the atmosphere was tense. The lights flickered, and the low hum of the engines sounded strained. The small crew was doing everything they could to keep the ship stable. The evacuation passengers' families, workers, students were scared and whispering prayers, trying not to let panic take over. They had already survived one disaster. They didn't want another. The captain of the Resolute stood at the front console, staring at the red warnings flashing across the screen. He knew the situation was breaking apart from every angle. The ship had limited fuel, weak shields, and a damaged outer hull. And now alien fighters were moving toward them at increasing speed. He knew humans weren't supposed to be here. He knew they weren't built for this kind of war. And most importantly, he knew they had innocent people on board who depended on him. "Stay calm," he told his crew. "We're not going down without trying everything." His voice was steady, but inside he felt the pressure weighing on him. He knew every decision he made in the next few minutes could save or destroy everyone on the ship dot as the Resolute drifted deeper into the Battlezone. The Dominion watched from a distance. They expected the small human craft to be overwhelmed the moment the swarm reached it. After all, the swarm was known for destroying anything in their path. A small, damaged human ship had no hope. Some Dominion officers felt pity. Some felt confusion. Some felt annoyed that a random accident had brought a fragile vessel into their war. But soon, their screens filled with flashing alerts. The human ship was powering up certain systems, not weapons, but defensive protocols and maneuvering thrusters. Why? One officer whispered. They must know they can't win. But what they didn't understand was something deeply human, the instinct to protect. The refusal to surrender, the fierce hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through. Meanwhile, the swarm fighters got closer, forming a circle around the Resolute. They expected the humans to panic, cry out, or beg for mercy. But the humans stayed steady. They didn't fire back, but they didn't give up either. The captain breathed slowly as he guided the ship into a slow, purposeful movement, pulling them toward a cloud of broken debris left behind by earlier battles. It wasn't much protection, but it was something. The Dominion saw this and paused. The humans were not turning their ship off or surrendering. They were trying to navigate, trying to survive, trying to stay ahead, even though the odds were hopelessly against them. Alien commanders watched in silence as the small vessel entered the debris cloud. They expected the swarm fighters to fire immediately and tear the ship apart. But something else happened instead. The debris field messed with the swarm's targeting systems. Pieces of broken metal and shattered armor floated everywhere, confusing their sensors. The human ship moved slowly through the wreckage, using the floating chunks of destroyed ships as shields. The Dominion officers leaned closer to the screen. For the first time, they realized the humans were not just drifting. They were thinking, planning, fighting in their own silent way. The first shot from the 10th swarm hit a large piece of debris instead of the human vessel. The blast tore through the wreckage, but the Resolute slipped behind a larger metal plate. Another shot missed, then another. The swarm fighters grew, frustrated and fired more aggressively. But their own shots bounced off debris and even struck each other by accident. The Dominion officers exchanged stunned looks. How? How are they doing that? One muttered. It's not luck, another replied. They're reading the debris, using it like cover. For the first time in that war zone's long history, both sides watched a single tiny vessel hold back the advance of a powerful swarm squad. Not by strength, not by speed, but simply by refusing to fall. Humans had always been known for their strange instinct to survive, even when they shouldn't. The Resolute was proving that. Reputation once again. As the part closes, the Dominion's main computer generated a new alert. Warning, human war vessel detected. Activity level increasing. The officers who had ignored the ship earlier now stared at the screen, realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding. A fragile human ship had entered a battlefield no one survived. And somehow it was still standing. The human vessel, the Resolute, moved slowly but deliberately through the chaos of the Rexion conflict zone. Its hull was scarred, engines sputtering, yet inside, the crew worked with calm precision. The small team of humans knew that every decision mattered, that a single mistake could cost everyone on board. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense, yet they had been trained to survive impossible situations. And right now, survival meant keeping the ship steady, protecting the evacuees, and finding any way to escape the deadly battlefield surrounding them. Captain Rylan, the commanding officer, stood at the front console, hands steady on the controls. His eyes scanned the holographic map of the zone, which was filled with red and green blips representing enemy and allied ships, debris, and explosive hazards. The small human vessel was a tiny dot among giants, a fragile craft in the midst of unstoppable forces. He knew their chances were slim. Any wrong move, any miscalculation, and they would be torn apart instantly. But giving up was not an option. We have civilians on board, he reminded his team. That's our priority. Keep them safe at all costs. The rest, we figure out as we go. The crew nodded, working efficiently to stabilize the engines and maintain the shields. Every movement in the control room was precise, almost like a dance. The Resolute was not just a machine. It was a lifeline, and everyone on board treated it with respect. Outside, the debris from destroyed ships floated like jagged clouds of metal, and the occasional explosion lit the darkness with deadly flashes of light. As they navigated the debris, one of the crew members called out from the scanning station, "Captain, I'm picking up a new signal. It's not Swarm, not Dominion either. It's different." Ryland focused on the new readout. The signal was faint, almost like a whisper in the storm of space. He frowned. Humans were rare in this region, and even other neutral ships avoided the battle zone. "Can you identify it?" he asked. "A Dominion vessel," the crew member said finally. "It's approaching. Not hostile. Not yet. But it's aware of us." Rylan exhaled slowly. Dominion ships were powerful and usually uninterested in small human vessels. But if they noticed them, things could get complicated fast. Still, he had learned long ago that assuming others would attack immediately was dangerous. Sometimes the best chance of survival was to make a careful choice, not a reckless one. "Prepare for contact," he said calmly. "We don't want to fight them, but we need to be ready." Moments later, a Dominion cruiser appeared through the debris haze. It was enormous compared to the Resolute, with a hull designed to survive direct hits and weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The human ship looked almost like an insect crawling past a giant predator. The Dominion cruiser's lights flickered as they scanned the Resolute. On board, the humans could feel the weight of the scrutiny, the silent judgment of a species that had ruled this part of space for decades. "Open a communication channel," Rylan ordered. "Let's see what they want." The holographic display flickered, and a calm, deep voice filled the cabin. "This is Commander Vector of the Xyler Dominion. Identify your vessel and declare your intent in the battle zone." Rylan stepped forward. He knew that speaking honestly was sometimes the safest option. "This is the Resolute, a human transport ship. We are carrying evacuees from a destroyed colony. We did not intend to enter this conflict. Our path was altered. We seek safe passage." There was a long pause. Dominion ships rarely tolerated civilians in the battle zone, and humans were known for their stubbornness. Yet something in Ryland's tone, in the quiet confidence of his crew, seemed to strike a chord with the Dominion commander. "You are human," Victor said finally. "Your presence here is unusual. Humans rarely enter this zone. Your actions thus far suggest survival instinct and some level of tactical awareness. Explain why you are not already destroyed by the swarm." Ryland's lips pressed together. "We are not the strongest. We are not a warship. But we do what we must to survive. That is all you need to know for now." Victor studied them silently. Then he said, "You may continue. But be warned, any interference with our operations will be met with force." The line went dead, leaving the humans in tense silence. It was a fragile understanding, a temporary window that could disappear at any second. But it was enough. For now, they could breathe a little, plan a little, and keep moving. As the Resolute continued, the crew discussed their next move. The debris field offered some protection from the swarm, but it was narrow and dangerous. One wrong move, and they could be trapped or crushed. They had to navigate with extreme care, using every ounce of skill and intuition. The youngest crew member, a technician who had joined the evacuation team to protect families, spoke softly. "Captain, why do they keep underestimating us?" Ryland looked at her, eyes thoughtful. "Because humans don't always follow patterns. We don't give up when we should. We fight in ways others don't expect. That's what makes us hard to predict." Her eyes widened. "But we're so small compared to them." "We may be small," Ryland said, "but we're not powerless. Size doesn't determine survival. Strategy, courage, and a refusal to surrender that matters more than bulk or firepower." Outside the ship, the swarm was already making adjustments. They had noticed the Dominion's intervention and were growing frustrated. They expected to pick off the small human vessel easily. But every time they tried, they ran into debris, misjudged movements, or found themselves firing on each other accidentally. The Resolute was proving to be more than just a target. It was a problem the swarm had never anticipated. Inside the ship, the crew worked tirelessly. Every minor adjustment to shields, every course correction through debris, every calculation of potential threats was a matter of life and death. The evacuees were mostly silent, holding hands, whispering prayers, or staring wide-eyed at the flashing warnings and bright explosions outside. They didn't know if they would survive, but they had learned to trust the humans piloting the Resolute as the vessel maneuvered through a particularly dense section of wreckage. A new challenge appeared. A rogue piece of alien technology, a floating energy mine, drifted into their path. It pulsed with a dangerous glow, ready to explode at the slightest disturbance. The Resolute's sensors picked it up just in time. "Divert power to shields," Ryland shouted. "And hold steady." The crew reacted instantly, diverting energy, adjusting thrusters, and guiding the ship past the mine. There was a tense moment when the mine brushed the hull, sending vibrations through the ship. But it did not detonate. The crew exhaled quietly, realizing how close they had come to disaster. For the humans, every narrow escape reinforced their determination. Fear was present, but it did not control them. The fear sharpened their focus, making them faster, more precise, more alive. They were not just surviving, they were learning, adapting, thinking several steps ahead in a battlefield designed to overwhelm even the strongest fleets. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, the Resolute reached a slightly more open area in the conflict zone. Dominion ships had moved forward, creating a loose protective barrier against the swarm, and the humans had a moment to regroup. They checked the engines, shields, and life support, repairing minor damages as best they could. Raylan allowed himself a brief glance at the evacuees. Faces pale and eyes wide, they looked exhausted, but safe for now. He offered a small nod. "We're still here," he said quietly. We're still moving. That's what counts. One of the crew, an experienced navigator, spoke up. Captain, Dominion ships are observing us. They're impressed. I think they've realized that we're not just drifting in space by accident. We're maneuvering with intent. Rylan nodded. That was both good and dangerous. The Dominion could be allies, temporary as it may be, but they were still a powerful force. Humans had to maintain their independence, their control over the ship and the evacuees. The last thing they needed was to be seen as just another pawn dot as the Resolute moved forward. A faint message appeared on their comm system. Not from the Dominion, not from the swarm, but from a neutral observer fleet passing through the outskirts of the zone. Human ship detected. You are far from home. Your actions are unexpected. Keep moving. Survival favors those who refuse to surrender. The crew exchanged glances. Words from another human, or maybe an alien who understood human resilience, didn't change their reality. But it was a small reassurance that they were not alone in the chaos. Captain Rylan returned his focus to the main console. The Resolute was still weak, still tiny compared to everything around it. But it was moving. It was alive. And as long as it moved, there was hope. Somewhere deep in the conflict zone, alien eyes watched the small vessel, puzzled and cautious. A human ship surviving here, navigating with skill and determination, was unusual. It was more than unusual. It was dangerous in a way they didn't fully understand. And for the humans on board, that was enough to keep fighting, one careful maneuver at a time. Every second survived, every obstacle overcome, was proof that even the smallest ship could make a difference. Even in a war that seemed endless, the Resolute moved forward into the unknown, carrying hope, determination, and the fragile lives of those who trusted the humans to guide them through a storm no one should have survived. And somewhere, far from home, Captain Rylan whispered to himself, "We just keep going. That's all we can do." The Resolute continued its slow but steady movement through the Rexion conflict zone, carrying the exhausted crew and terrified evacuees deeper into the chaos. Outside, the battle raged on. Alien warships exchanged massive blasts of energy that lit up the dark void of space like fireworks gone horribly wrong. Debris from destroyed vessels floated aimlessly, creating a deadly maze. Each piece was a potential threat, a floating bomb that could tear through the hull of the Resolute if they miscalculated their course. Captain Rylan stood at the front console, eyes scanning the sensors. He could feel the tension in the cabin, like a weight pressing on everyone's shoulders. Each crew member moved quickly and deliberately, fully aware that one moment of hesitation could cost them their lives. The evacuees sat silently, gripping each other's hands, staring at the flickering lights of the controls and the tiny glimpses of explosions through the observation windows. Fear hung in the air, but so did a fragile trust in the humans guiding them through the storm. "Captain," the navigator said, voice low but steady, "the swarm fighters are adjusting their formation. They've noticed us. I think they're preparing to surround the ship." Raylan's jaw tightened. This was the moment he had been dreading. The swarm was relentless. Their fighters were small, fast, and deadly, and they were known to overwhelm larger ships with sheer numbers and aggression. The Resolute was not a warship. It was a transport vessel with reinforced shields and defensive systems, but it was not designed to fight a fleet. Yet, as always, Rylan refused to surrender. "Keep moving," he said calmly, even as his hands worked quickly over the controls. "We don't have to win. We just have to survive long enough to find an opening." Outside, the swarm ships began to close in. They were organized, ruthless, and calculating. But the humans had something the swarm did not fully understand: improvisation. The Resolute darted in and out of debris fields, using the floating wreckage as cover. Each movement was calculated, precise and unpredictable. The swarm expected hesitation, panic, or surrender. Instead, they encountered something no one had expected, a tiny ship that refused to give in. One of the evacuees, a young child, pressed their face to the window and whispered, "Why aren't they stopping us?" A crew member knelt beside them, voice soft, "Because they don't know how strong we are. They don't know that humans fight to survive." The child's eyes widened, but they stayed quiet, gripping the small hand of a sibling. The small moments of reassurance were important. Even in the middle of chaos, the humans on board tried to maintain calm, to remind everyone that survival was possible. The swarm's first wave of fighters attacked. Energy blasts tore through the debris, some striking close enough to the Resolute to shake the ship violently. Alarms rang, red lights flashed, and the crew braced themselves. Shields absorbed much of the damage, but the hull groaned under the pressure. "Adjust shields to maximum," Ryland shouted. "Divert power to engines push through." The crew moved like a single unit. Each person knew their role perfectly. Engineers worked to stabilize the failing systems, adjusting energy flow to maintain a balance between shields and mobility. Pilots fine-tuned thrusters to make the ship slip past deadly obstacles. Every movement was a step toward survival, and the humans' determination shone in the face of overwhelming odds. The first wave of swarm fighters was repelled, but only barely. More were coming, faster and more aggressively. The Resolute's shields flickered under the strain, and the hull took visible damage. Sparks flew inside the cabin as systems overloaded. The evacuees gasped and cried, but the crew maintained a steady presence, a reassuring calm that reminded everyone that giving up was not an option. Raylan studied the sensors. The swarm was methodical, predictable in some ways, but arrogant. They assumed that a small human ship could be overwhelmed by force alone. They didn't anticipate creativity, quick thinking, or a refusal to surrender. "We can use their arrogance against them," Ryland said quietly, mostly to himself. Then he addressed the crew. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going to make them chase shadows. Every time they expect us to move one way, we'll move another." The crew nodded, understanding immediately. Humans had survived countless battles, not because they had the biggest weapons, but because they refused to follow predictable patterns. Every move was a test, every decision a small gamble. Outside, the Resolute slipped through a narrow passage between two massive wrecked ships. The swarm fighters followed, but their formation became chaotic. Some collided with debris, others accidentally fired at their own companions. The Resolute's small size and precise movements made it almost impossible to hit. "Nice work," the navigator said, eyes wide. "They're falling apart. They're not expecting this." Rylan allowed himself a small nod. "Good. Keep it steady. Don't let them regroup." The next challenge was a minefield left over from a previous battle. These mines were highly sensitive, designed to detonate at the slightest touch. The Resolute's sensors detected them just in time, and Ryland guided the ship carefully through the dangerous field. Every adjustment of thrusters, every minor shift in course, was a delicate balance. One mistake could trigger an explosion that would tear the ship apart. The crew worked together seamlessly, almost instinctively. Engineers recalibrated sensors to avoid false triggers. Pilots made subtle corrections to keep the ship steady. Even the evacuees were instructed to stay seated and remain calm, a task that was difficult but essential. Finally, after navigating the minefield, the Resolute reached a slightly more open area. For a brief moment, the crew and evacuees could breathe. The battle was still raging around them, but at least they had a small reprieve. Ryland took a deep breath and allowed himself a glance at the evacuees. Many of them were exhausted, faces pale and eyes wide. But they were alive. That was all that mattered. "We're doing okay," he said quietly. "We're still moving. We're still alive. That's what counts." One of the engineers spoke up. "Captain, the Dominion is observing us. I think they've realized we're not just drifting. We're making deliberate maneuvers. We're interfering with the battle." Rylan nodded thoughtfully. This was dangerous. The Dominion could be potential allies, but they were also a powerful force. The last thing he wanted was for them to see the humans as a threat. But the fact that they were watching also meant that the Resolute had a chance to gain some advantage. To survive the battle zone with help, if only temporary, the crew exchanged silent glances, understanding the unspoken challenge. They had to survive, but they also had to be careful not to provoke any side unnecessarily. Survival required both courage and subtlety, both strength and restraint. The swarm fighters regrouped, more organized now, and launched a coordinated attack. The Resolute's shields shuddered under the fire, and the hull took further damage. Sparks flew inside the cabin, and alarms blared. The evacuees clutched each other, tears streaming down their faces. Fear was high, but the humans guiding them remained calm, their focus unwavering. Ryland's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus. Trust the ship. Trust each other. We can get through this." The crew worked tirelessly, guiding the ship through narrow gaps, adjusting shields, and maintaining power to critical systems. Each successful maneuver bolstered their confidence, reinforcing the belief that survival was possible, even against overwhelming odds. For the first time in hours, the Resolute had a small moment of control. The swarm fighters had been slowed, scattered, and confused by the humans' unpredictable maneuvers. The evacuees allowed themselves a few moments of quiet, trusting that the humans would continue to guide them safely. Ryland looked out at the battle zone, a vast expanse of destruction and chaos. He felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that every decision he made affected not only his crew, but the lives of innocent civilians. But he also felt a sense of determination. Humans were small in the vast universe, fragile in the face of giant fleets and deadly weapons. But they had something unique: resilience. They refused to surrender. They adapted. They survived as the Resolute continued its journey, moving deeper into the conflict zone. One thing became clear: humans were unpredictable. They did not fight with sheer power alone, but with cleverness, courage, and determination. And in a war zone where others relied on overwhelming force, that unpredictability became their greatest weapon. The Resolute pressed on, each moment a small victory, each maneuver a testament to human ingenuity. The evacuees clung to hope, the crew clung to skill, and Captain Ryland clung to the belief that survival, even against impossible odds, was always within reach, and somewhere deep in the battle zone. Alien eyes watched the tiny vessel with confusion, frustration, and a grudging respect. A human ship, small and damaged, was not just surviving, it was disrupting the flow of the battlefield, challenging expectations, and proving that even the smallest, seemingly weakest vessel could make a difference. The Resolute moved forward, carrying hope, courage, and the fragile lives of those who trusted it. In a universe filled with chaos and destruction, that tiny human ship became a symbol of what determination and refusal to surrender could achieve. Captain Ryland whispered to himself, steady and resolute, "We just keep going. That's all we can do." The Resolute had survived hours of relentless attacks, weaving through debris and dodging the swarm fighters with careful precision. Its crew was exhausted but alert, knowing that their endurance and focus had kept everyone alive so far. The evacuees were quiet, some asleep from sheer exhaustion, some holding each other in silent fear. The human ship was battered, but it still moved. Every movement was a triumph, a small victory in the heart of a war zone that seemed endless and unforgiving. Captain Ryland stood at the front console, watching the surrounding battle unfold. From a distance, the Dominion fleet moved with purpose, powerful and imposing. They had been observing the Resolute since its arrival, curious about the humans' unpredictable maneuvers. The Dominion commanders had never seen a ship like this, a fragile human vessel that moved with intelligence, courage, and determination through a zone where even massive warships were at risk. "Captain," the navigator said cautiously, "the Dominion is signaling us again. This time it's more formal. They want to talk." Raylan's eyes narrowed. He knew the Dominion could be allies or threats. Their motives were often inscrutable, and their patience with outsiders was limited. But they also had firepower and control of the battlefield, which could provide the humans with a chance to survive if handled carefully. "Open the channel," he ordered. A holographic display flickered to life, and the stern, composed face of Commander Victor appeared. His expression was calm but unreadable. "This is Commander Victor of the Xyler Dominion. You have proven remarkable persistence, human. Most ships of your type would have been destroyed within minutes. I offer a temporary alliance. Your survival and continued movement through this battle zone could be mutually beneficial." Rylan exhaled slowly. A temporary alliance was exactly what they needed. "We accept," he said. "But we have conditions. We are transporting civilians. Any engagement must prioritize their safety. No reckless attacks, no unnecessary risks." Victor nodded once. "Agreed. You will provide tactical support and maneuvering expertise. We will provide cover fire and additional protection. Understand that this alliance is temporary. Any deviation from the plan could result in immediate consequences." Rylan understood perfectly. Trust was fragile, and human survival depended on discipline and precise execution. "Understood," he replied. "We will work with you." The crew immediately began coordinating with Dominion ships, adjusting the Resolute's course to align with the fleet while avoiding swarm forces. The Dominion provided heavy firepower, shielding the human vessel from direct attacks, while the Resolute guided them through narrow passages, debris fields, and mine-laden areas that the larger ships could not navigate easily. It was a delicate balance of strengths. Humans provided adaptability, intuition, and unconventional thinking. The Dominion provided brute force and scale. For the evacuees, the sudden cooperation between the humans and Dominion was confusing but reassuring. They had no knowledge of galactic politics or the history of alien wars. They only knew that the humans on board had kept them alive against impossible odds. The presence of the Dominion fleet offered an additional layer of safety, and the passengers allowed themselves a few moments of relief. Rylan moved through the cabin, checking on the crew and evacuees. He offered quiet reassurances, telling them that the alliance with the Dominion was an opportunity, not a guarantee, and that they had to remain alert. The crew nodded, understanding the delicate balance they were navigating. Each person played their part: pilots, engineers, technicians, and even the evacuees who could follow instructions, all working together to maintain the fragile chance of survival. As the Resolute led the Dominion ships through a particularly dangerous section of the zone, the swarm responded aggressively. Their fighters tried to encircle the humans and the Dominion, but the combined efforts of the human ships' maneuvering and Dominion firepower created openings. The swarm's formation broke repeatedly, and confusion spread through their ranks. "Captain," the navigator said, "they're underestimating us again. They still think a human ship is just a small target, not a strategic asset." Rylan nodded. "Good. Let them underestimate us. We'll use it to our advantage." Using the debris field as cover, the Resolute weaved through the battlefield, drawing the swarm's attention and guiding the Dominion fleet to attack in precise, coordinated bursts. The swarm fighters found themselves caught off guard repeatedly, their arrogance and overconfidence turning into confusion and vulnerability. For a moment, the battle zone seemed to slow. Time was measured in careful movements and calculated decisions. Every laser, every explosion, every flickering sensor light reminded the crew that survival was not guaranteed. And yet, despite the danger, there was a rhythm of flow in which the humans thrived. They were small and vulnerable, but they were also clever, resilient, and determined. And determination in the hands of humans often turned the tide as the battle progressed. The Dominion began to respect the human ship more openly. Their commanders, usually dismissive of outsiders, began communicating more directly with Rylan and his crew. They asked for advice on maneuvering, recognized patterns in enemy movement, and started to adjust their attacks based on the humans' unconventional strategies. Rylan realized that the temporary alliance was more than just a survival tactic. It was a rare opportunity to influence a fleet far larger and more powerful than anything he had faced before. Every suggestion he made, every small tactical decision, had an impact. The Dominion fleet was adapting, learning from a human vessel that by conventional standards should have been destroyed hours ago. Inside the Resolute, the crew felt a mix of pride and responsibility. They were not just surviving, they were shaping the battlefield. Their skills, intuition, and human creativity were making a difference in a war that seemed hopelessly chaotic. The evacuees watched, some in awe, some still fearful, but all trusting the humans to guide them through the storm. During a brief lull in the fighting, Rylan took a moment to speak quietly with his crew. "Remember," he said, "we are small, but we are strong in our way. Our job is not to win the war, but to survive and protect those on board. Keep your focus, trust your instincts, and stay together. That's how we get through this." The engineers nodded, checking systems and adjusting shields, while the pilots ran simulations of potential swarm maneuvers. Every member of the crew understood that each decision could be the difference between life and death. And yet, despite the constant danger, they remained calm, precise, and determined. As the Resolute guided the Dominion fleet further into the zone, they encountered a large swarm dreadnought, a massive, heavily armored vessel designed to destroy everything in its path. Its presence was terrifying, even to seasoned commanders. But the humans remained focused. They analyzed the patterns of its movement, the timing of its attacks, and the weaknesses in its formation. "Captain," the navigator said, "if we can maneuver through that narrow channel, we can use the debris to create a trap. The dreadnought can't turn fast enough to avoid it." Rylan's eyes narrowed. It was risky, but it could work. "Do it," he said. "We'll draw it in. Dominion ships cover our back." The Resolute led the dreadnought into the channel. The debris formed a natural barrier, forcing the massive ship to slow and struggle with its movement. Dominion fire targeted its weak points, while the humans provided guidance to maximize the effectiveness of the attack. The dreadnought's massive hull shuddered under the combined assault. For a brief moment, the impossible seemed possible. The humans and Dominion had created a coordinated strike that even the swarm could not anticipate. After the attack, the Resolute moved away from the debris, leading the Dominion fleet into a safer corridor. The swarm retreated temporarily, regrouping and reassessing their strategy. The humans and Dominion had survived another wave, but they knew the danger was far from over. Raylan looked at his crew and the evacuees. "We've made it this far," he said quietly. "Every decision, every move has mattered. Keep your focus. We're not out of danger yet, but we are proving that even in a war zone, humans can make a difference." The crew nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They were small in the grand scale of the battle, but they were resilient, clever, and determined. And for now, that was enough. As the Resolute moved further into the zone, the temporary alliance with the Dominion held. Communication remained careful but effective, and the humans continued to guide the fleet through dangerous areas, avoiding mines, debris, and enemy formations. The evacuees, though exhausted and frightened, allowed themselves to trust in the humans who had guided them so far. And somewhere, deep in the conflict zone, the swarm watched the tiny human vessel with frustration and disbelief. They could not understand how a fragile transport ship had survived wave after wave of attacks, guided a fleet of Dominion ships, and disrupted their plans. The humans were unpredictable, clever, and relentless, a combination that no amount of brute force could easily overcome. The Resolute pressed on, carrying hope, courage, and the fragile lives of those who trusted it. In the vast chaos of the war zone, a small human ship had become a symbol of resilience and determination. And for Captain Rylan, the crew, and the evacuees, every moment survived was proof that even the smallest, weakest vessel could make a difference if its people refused to give up. "Keep moving," Rylan whispered to himself as he guided the Resolute forward. "That's all we can do. Step by step, moment by moment. We survive. We protect them. That's enough." The Resolute and the Dominion fleet had survived wave after wave of swarm attacks, navigating through debris, minefields, and dangerous enemy formations. For a while, it seemed like they might actually make it through the worst of the conflict zone. The evacuees allowed themselves a few moments of quiet, catching their breath, their hands still gripping each other tightly, but their fear slightly eased. The crew, though exhausted, kept the ship moving, shields up, engines stable, and eyes alert. Survival had become a rhythm, a series of small victories strung together by focus and determination. But then, the sensors detected something massive, something the humans and even the Dominion had never faced before in this zone. A Leviathan dreadform, a biomechanical monster of incredible size and destructive power, emerged from the darkness. Its hull was like living armor, pulsating with energy and covered in thick plating, capable of absorbing hits that would destroy entire fleets. Its tentacles and appendages moved with terrifying precision, capable of crushing ships or tearing them apart with a single strike. The warning alarms rang throughout the Resolute. The evacuees gasped and cried out in panic, some hiding their faces in their hands. The crew worked frantically to stabilize the ship, but even they knew that size and firepower were not on their side. Captain Rylan took a deep breath, gripping the console tightly. He studied the Leviathan's movements carefully. The creature was slow in some ways, lumbering across space, but every motion was deliberate, every appendage capable of instantaneous destruction. The Dominion fleet had never seen one maneuver like this in the middle of a battle zone, and even their confidence faltered. "Captain," the navigator said, voice tight, "if it catches us, we're done. Its firepower can wipe out our fleet in minutes." Ryland's jaw tightened. He knew the odds were almost impossible. The Resolute was small and agile, but even that might not be enough. The evacuees' safety depended entirely on their next decisions. For a moment, he felt the weight of the responsibility like never before. One wrong move, one hesitation, and everyone on board could be gone. "We're not running," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, "We hold our position and think. Everyone stay sharp. Look for weaknesses. Every second counts." The Dominion fleet moved into defensive positions around the Leviathan, firing massive energy blasts, but the creature barely flinched. Its armor absorbed hits as if they were nothing, and every strike it returned tore through the surrounding debris and ships. The fleet was struggling, unable to contain it, and the humans realized that conventional tactics would not work. "We can't fight it head on," the engineer said urgently. "We'll get destroyed." Rylan nodded, scanning the Leviathan carefully. "No, we need to be smarter. Its core, There has to be a weak point somewhere. Something that controls it, keeps it alive. We find that, and we have a chance. The crew worked together, analyzing every sensor reading, every movement the Leviathan made. The evacuees watched in tense silence, unable to help but feel the fear and intensity of the moment. They were trapped in a storm of destruction, far beyond their comprehension, relying entirely on the humans for survival. After a tense few minutes, Ryland spotted a faint signal deep inside the Leviathan's armor, a neural core, pulsing with energy, barely visible through the protective plating. It was risky, almost suicidal, but it was the only option. "We take the Resolute in close," Ryland said, voice steady. "We go inside, and we deploy the shock torpedo manually. It's the only way. We have no other choice." A silence fell over the crew. No one spoke for a moment, the weight of what was about to happen pressing on them. Finally, one of the pilots said, "We can do this. We've survived worse. Stick to the plan." The engineers began preparing the torpedo, making sure it would function at extreme proximity. The rest of the crew checked the shields, engines, and navigation systems. Every system that could be adjusted, every option that could give them an edge, was tested and recalibrated. Ryland took one last look at the evacuees. Their eyes were wide with fear, but they trusted him. That trust became a silent promise in his mind. He would do everything possible to bring them through this alive. The Resolute moved forward, entering the space around the Leviathan. Its massive appendages lashed out, striking at Dominion ships and tearing through debris with ease. The humans used every trick they knew, weaving through openings, avoiding direct attacks, and calculating every move with precision. "This is it," Ryland said, gripping the controls. "Hold steady, everyone." The ship moved closer, shields shimmering under the intense fire. The Leviathan was aware of them, striking in their direction repeatedly, but the Resolute's agility allowed it to slip past tentacles and energy beams that would have destroyed any other vessel. Inside the cabin, the crew's faces were tense but focused. Every second was measured, every breath held in anticipation. The evacuees could only watch, hearts pounding, as the humans piloted their tiny ship into the heart of danger. "Targeting core," a navigator called out. "We're in range." "Clear a path for the torpedo." Ryland nodded. "Engage sequence. Prepare for manual launch. We only get one shot at this." The engineers initiated the torpedo, its systems humming with controlled energy. The shockwave had to hit the neural core precisely, or the entire attempt would fail, and the ship would be destroyed instantly. As the Resolute approached the core, the Leviathan lashed out violently. Tentacles struck close to the ship, causing alarms to scream and the hull to shudder. Sparks flew inside, lights flickered, and the evacuees clutched each other, bracing for impact. "Steady," Ryland shouted. "Now launch the torpedo." The engineers released the torpedo manually. It shot forward, gliding precisely toward the neural core. Time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an eternity as the crew watched the small device move into the heart of the massive creature. Then impact. The torpedo struck the core with a brilliant flash of energy. The Leviathan let out a massive roar of soundless fury, its armor pulsing violently. Energy discharged in all directions, and the massive body of the creature convulsed. The Resolute shook violently, shields barely holding against the backlash. But the torpedo had hit its mark. The Leviathan's movements slowed, its strikes becoming less precise, less deadly. Dominion ships pressed the attack, taking advantage of the chaos to regain control of the battlefield. The once terrifying bioweapon collapsed, its neural core destroyed, and it disintegrated into the debris cloud, leaving a massive vacuum in space. Where it had stood, the evacuees screamed with relief, tears streaming down their faces. They had survived the impossible. The crew of the Resolute, battered and exhausted, allowed themselves a few moments of quiet celebration. They had done it. Against overwhelming odds, they had faced a creature designed to destroy fleets and survived. Raylan exhaled, voice hoarse but steady. "We did it," he said. "We survived. Everyone on board is safe." The Dominion fleet moved in to escort the Resolute out of the immediate danger zone. Their commanders sent messages of acknowledgement and rare praise. Humans, small and fragile, had done what even seasoned fleets could not. The tiny ship had not only survived, but had changed the tide of the battle in that region of space inside the Resolute. The crew began repairing damage, checking systems, and ensuring the evacuees were calm and reassured. Despite exhaustion, there was a sense of pride of accomplishment. They had faced death directly and emerged alive, not by brute force, but by courage, ingenuity, and determination. Rylan walked through the cabin, offering quiet words to the evacuees. "You were brave," he said softly. "You stayed calm and trusted us. That trust saved all of you. Remember that. We survived because we worked together." The evacuees nodded, tears in their eyes, understanding for the first time the courage it took to pilot a small ship through impossible odds. They had seen the humans' resilience firsthand, and it was a lesson they would never forget. Even as they moved further from the Leviathan, the battle zone remained dangerous, but the humans had proven something extraordinary, that size, strength, and firepower were not the only measures of survival. Determination, courage, and clever thinking could turn the impossible into reality. Rylan returned to the console, hands steady despite exhaustion. He knew more challenges would come, but for now, the immediate threat was gone. The crew had survived, the evacuees were safe, and the Resolute had done what no one expected. Humans were small in the galaxy, fragile by comparison, but their spirit, unyielding, resourceful, and brave, was unmatched. He whispered quietly to himself as the ship moved forward. "We keep going, one step at a time. That's all we can do." And we survive. The Resolute had survived the Leviathan dreadform, a feat that seemed impossible just hours before. Its crew was battered, exhausted, and running on pure determination, yet the ship continued to move steadily through the conflict zone. The evacuees, once terrified and panicked, now clung to hope, their eyes wide with cautious optimism. Every life on board had been preserved, and that was a victory in itself. Captain Ryland stood at the front console, scanning the surrounding space. The battle zone was still chaotic, but there was a noticeable change. The Dominion fleet, once distant and aloof, had begun to operate with a sense of respect for the humans. They maintained positions to cover the Resolute, relying on its guidance, to navigate debris fields and dangerous zones that larger vessels could not traverse safely. The swarm forces, meanwhile, had become wary of the small ship that had defeated their monstrous weapon. "We've done what no one expected," the navigator said quietly, almost in disbelief. "They're watching us differently now." Rylan nodded. "Humans are unpredictable. That's our advantage. Never underestimate what a determined crew can do, no matter the size of the ship." The evacuees remained silent for a while, some staring out into space, trying to grasp the enormity of the battle they had just survived. Many had never been beyond their colonies before. Now, they had witnessed destruction on a scale they could barely imagine, and the resilience of humans who refused to give up. Their fear was slowly being replaced by a quiet awe. An engineer spoke up from her station. "Captain, systems are stabilizing. Shields held, engines are steady, and life support is fully functional. The torpedo deployment caused minor feedback, but it's all under control." Rylan allowed himself a small nod of relief. Technical problems could be repaired. The evacuees could be protected. The crew could continue to function. Survival for now was possible because of their skill and teamwork. The Dominion fleet maintained a protective formation, watching the Resolute as it moved through a particularly dense area filled with floating wreckage. Rylan guided the ship carefully, weaving through narrow gaps, avoiding energy mines, and dodging debris. The humans' agility and decision-making were unmatched in this environment, and the Dominion had begun to rely on them more openly. "Captain," a Dominion officer finally spoke over the comm channel, "your maneuvers saved several of our ships. Your insight into navigation and evasion is remarkable. Humans are resilient beyond what we expected." Ryland's expression remained calm, though inwardly he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. "We survive by thinking, adapting, and staying focused," he replied. "Size and firepower alone don't guarantee survival." The Dominion commander paused before responding. "This will be noted. Your actions today will be remembered." The channel went silent. Inside the Resolute, the crew felt a mixture of pride and caution. Respect from a powerful alien fleet was rare, but survival still depended on vigilance. Every sensor reading, every potential threat, was being monitored carefully. The evacuees, sensing the crew's focus, relaxed slightly, trusting their guidance and determination. Hours passed as the human vessel and Dominion fleet moved through the remaining hazards of the zone. The swarm had retreated temporarily, regrouping elsewhere, likely wary of the Resolute's unexpected abilities. Each moment of calm was used to repair minor damages, replenish shields, and maintain the ship's engines at full capacity. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, aware that rest was temporary and danger could return at any moment. Reelan walked through the cabin, checking on the evacuees. Some had tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the day's events. Others were quietly whispering to each other, processing what they had seen. He knelt beside a small group, speaking softly. "You're safe now," he said. "We've survived, and we're not done yet. Keep your hope alive." The evacuees nodded, some offering small smiles, and for the first time in hours, a faint sense of calm filled the cabin. It was a fragile peace, but it was enough to remind everyone why they were fighting to survive. The Resolute emerged from the final debris fields into open space. The Dominion fleet adjusted their formation, giving the small human ship more freedom to move. The evacuees peered out of the windows, seeing stars that stretched endlessly, untouched by war. A reminder of the universe beyond the chaos. "Captain," the navigator said, "we're clear of immediate danger. Sensors show no swarm presence nearby for the moment. We can move forward without evasive maneuvers." Rylan allowed himself a deep breath. "Good. Maintain course and stay alert. This is only a temporary reprieve." The Dominion fleet began to communicate more openly, asking for advice on navigating future battle zones, coordinating movements, and sharing information about enemy patterns. The humans' ability to adapt and strategize had earned them not just survival, but a voice in a battlefield where they had no reason to be respected. One of the engineers spoke quietly to Rylan. "Captain, I think they're starting to see humans differently. Not just small and fragile, but capable of more than they realized." Rylan nodded. "We've always been underestimated. That's our strength. When others think we're weak, we move with precision, determination, and courage. That's how we survive." The evacuees, observing the interactions, slowly began to understand. Humans were not invincible, but their resilience and refusal to surrender had turned them into a symbol of hope. Even amidst the alien chaos, they had achieved the impossible as the fleet moved further from the conflict zone. The Resolute maintained its course, leading the Dominion ships through safer corridors, guiding them around hazards, and showing that even a small ship could make a difference. The crew worked tirelessly, but there was a sense of accomplishment that bolstered their spirits. For the first time in hours, Rylan allowed himself to reflect. They had survived a battle that should have destroyed them. They had faced the Leviathan Dreadform, navigated through deadly zones, and earned the respect of a fleet far larger and stronger than themselves. Each decision, each maneuver, each act of courage had mattered. The Dominion commander addressed the Resolute once more. Humans are unusual. Your ability to survive, adapt, and influence this battle is noted. We will remember your vessel and your crew. You have proven that determination and courage can be as powerful as weapons. Ryland remained silent for a moment, absorbing the significance of the statement. Then he replied simply, "Thank you. We only do what we must to survive and protect those who cannot protect themselves." The Dominion fleet continued to escort them for a while, then gradually peeled off, returning to their positions and operations within the zone. The Resolute was alone again, but this time, they were not just surviving, they had survived and proven their worth in ways that would be remembered across the galaxy. Inside the ship, the evacuees began to relax, realizing that they were moving away from immediate danger. Some whispered words of thanks to the crew, others simply held each other in relief. The humans who had guided them through the storm allowed themselves small moments of quiet satisfaction. They had kept everyone alive, and that was all that mattered. Ryland stood at the front console, looking out into the vast emptiness of space. Stars stretched endlessly, silent and beautiful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine home, not just the planet where humans were born, but the idea of safety, of peace, of survival. "Keep moving," he said softly to the crew. "We've survived. That's our strength. And as long as we keep moving, nothing can stop us completely." The crew nodded, understanding that survival was not just about escaping danger, it was about endurance, courage, and adaptability. Every small decision mattered. Every moment of determination contributed to the greater goal of keeping everyone alive. The evacuees, exhausted but safe, began to talk quietly among themselves. They shared stories, comforted each other, and slowly regained a sense of normalcy. The humans on board maintained their calm, guiding, and reassuring, always ready for the next challenge. As the Resolute moved further from the conflict zone, the legend of the tiny human vessel began to spread. Even the Dominion fleet, formidable and often dismissive of outsiders, now spoke of the ship with respect. It was a symbol of what humans could achieve when determination, intelligence, and courage were combined. Rylan allowed himself a small smile. They were far from home, small in a galaxy of immense power and conflict, yet they had survived. They had guided the helpless, faced the impossible, and proven that humans were not to be underestimated. He looked at his crew and evacuees. "We made it," he said quietly. "Not because we were the strongest, not because we had the biggest weapons, but because we refused to give up. That's what makes us human. That's what kept us alive." And for the first time since entering the conflict zone, a quiet sense of peace settled over the Resolute. The battle was far from over, but they had survived the impossible, and that survival would echo across the galaxy. Humans were small, fragile, and underestimated, but their spirit, their determination, and their courage could never be defeated. Raylan whispered to himself, steady and calm, "We survived. We keep moving. We endure. That is what humans do." The Resolute glided forward through the stars, carrying hope, courage, and the lives of those who had trusted it. Against impossible odds, the tiny human ship had become a legend, a symbol of resilience, and proof that even in the darkest battles, the human spirit could shine brighter than the fiercest weapons. The journey was not over, but for now they had survived, and that was enough.